haven't.
Nothing. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next podcast. And today I'm kind of absolutely delighted to present a friend, a colleague, and someone who I hold in high esteem, Andrew Jewell. Andrew Jewell is the director of Andrew Jewell Education, and he is also working for Inspired Learning, and he's based in Scotland. And I'm sure we're going to have quite a riveting conversation about education in Scotland and some of the big projects that Andrew's been working on over there. Great to have you, Andy.
Yeah, really good to be here. So thanks for having me. It's actually bizarrely hot in Scotland today. So yeah, I'm just melting in my office.
It's a rare thing, but it's actually like super hot in Bolton as well, which never really happens. And we're never prepared for these kinds of scenarios. So I think we'll just have to swelter and drink lots of iced tea and things like that. You know how it goes.
I have it.
So Andy, tell us about Scotland. I know there's lots for those of you that are joining us or kind of watching this after the live event. You know, Scotland has been doing some really great stuff. I know of at least 3 one-to-one projects that are happening in various districts, Glasgow being one of them. I think something like 50,000 devices, one for each student. This was before the pandemic, so it's not been a reactive measure. I've also heard some whisperings about the whole of Scotland going one-to-one as well, and so on. So tell us a little bit about the future of education in Scotland. What does that look like? I mean, that's seriously.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? I mean, we could talk about this from so many different angles, right? So technology is one thing, but even before you get to the technology, it's a really interesting sort of place to be involved in education right now. We've just had a big review of our curriculum. So Scotland, maybe a number of years ago now, we developed the Curriculum for Excellence, which is our kind of national curriculum, if you like. Very interesting in terms of conceptually, really kind of like opens the door for teachers who want to have a little bit more autonomy, that don't just want to teach from the textbook. So there's a kind of an element of creativity and critical thinking really kind of enshrined in the heart of the curriculum, which is great. But that obviously has its challenges, and it's had its challenges in the past sort of 10 years. So it's been reviewed. Recently, we've had the OECD report, which has recommended a whole bunch of changes, particularly around senior phase and assessment and how it's assessed. And that's going to be a really interesting time going forward. So in terms of the future, I think from the curriculum point of view, there's a lot really interesting kind of changes taking place. Some of the bodies that kind of govern Scottish education, so Education Scotland and the Scottish Qualifications Authority, they're being revamped and really streamlined and updated, I think. So there's a lot really to kind of look at going forward there. But I mean, in terms of technology, so it isn't just whispers. We're the government have committed to a full device for every child policy across Scotland. So 350 million pounds of a project, and that's something that will take place. We're waiting to hear the details of exactly what that looks like or the mechanics of the rollout. But yeah, for me, it's super exciting because I've been at this in Scotland and actually I've done work with one-to-one projects like you, Abdul, in various parts of the world. But for years it was never at home, and I was kind of like, when does the moment come when we can do a bit of work at home? And then we had Edinburgh, and then Glasgow, and then the Borders, and now Falkirk. And, it literally has become, the momentum has really massively increased. And the pandemic's helped that, obviously, massively.
Absolutely. But I think what's important to note is the way in which, I know I was there for the Glasgow launch. And, I was hearing, is it Maureen McKenna, the Director of Education there? Speaking about that kind of access to, like, this equitable access, so it's not just the device, but the ability to kind of have that continuous learning environment at home, being able to ask questions when the students want to, that kind of umbilical cord to learning that doesn't really kind of go away, and caters for the needs of children that are very, very different, as we know, and also then provide kind of flexibility to teachers as well. So in some ways, I think like that in itself was quite impressive, and it's no doubt in my mind that that's kind of snowballed and mushroomed into this one-to-one commitment that we're seeing now. And it's interesting, like some countries have responded in a much more reactive way. So I know in Singapore, after the COVID stuff had happened, the government then announced, hey, this is something that all students should have. This isn't something that we should be worrying about. Let's talk about what we're going to do with it and how it's going to change and what the impacts and so on. So from that perspective, I think that's kind of very forward thinking. So my next question really is around the concept of hybrid learning. Yeah, how important is that going to be as part of the ongoing digital strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be super important. I mean, I think what we know now is that, and we're right still in the middle of this. So we're not kind of come out of the other side and everyone's kind of going back to normal. It feels to me like people are increasingly aware that the new normal is actually going to have to be a new normal. It's not just going to be normal, because, we're still seeing volatility in terms of, kids. And in fact, in some ways, in Scotland, we've got that volatility as much as we've ever had it in the classroom. Kids being, isolating or working from home, and classes are often some kids face to face and some at home. So that idea of kind of hybrid in terms of, the kids that are the students that are sitting in front of you and where they are and how they're accessing learning. We had, in the borders, we had a number of students over the course of the past year who have taken classes remotely, who have achieved now their exam results, and they've actually gone on to university based on the results from classes that they were taking in places that they weren't physically actually sitting in the buildings. So that's happened. We've seen, I've facilitated kind of art classes with the guys at Procreate based in Tasmania.
Yeah.
We've had all of our kids in the borders sitting, taking an art class in different schools, physically, like taking a live lesson that's being led by the guys who developed the app that is used by Netflix and Disney Plus and all the new Batman comics that, drawn on it, and that kind of thing is, I'm like, this is unbelievably exciting, right? And it's funny because the students are just sitting going, they're kind of engaged, and you can see them actually just getting involved in the lesson, taking up the challenges, working together. And actually it's us who are kind of like, they don't realize how unbelievably cool this is, what they're just doing right now, right? They're just learning from a teacher who is, just got, about to go to bed in Tasmania and is leading a lesson that we're taking in the borders at first thing in the morning. It's amazing.
That is kind of pretty amazing, but it's like you say, right? For children, this isn't technology. This is what the world is now.
Totally.
And we've kind of said this in the past. Like technology for them will be whatever comes in their lifetime that makes them react in the way that we're doing now when we see things happen like this, see things like this happen, right? So in some ways, that's kind of absolutely fascinating. I know I've kind of been to Glasgow, to some of the schools and so on, and it was quite interesting. It was just before lockdown, and I was doing some work with just on Castlemilk High School.
Yeah.
And we're kind of doing that, and we were also obviously we're looking at Showbie, hybrid learning platform. We were looking at digitized verbal feedback. We were looking at Socrative and being able to do remote assessment and all that kind of stuff and so on. But I think like just towards the end of that week, I was heading back, and the head teacher was like, I've got a feeling we're going to get an email to this to say everything is going to go in lockdown and so on. And the next time I spoke to her, she was just like that was what you call just in time kind of planning. Like literally, schools were able then to go away, and teachers were able to go away and carry on doing what they would have done in the classroom.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because I still think through all of this, right? I still think, like, I'm a teacher, right? You're a teacher. I still think the teacher is a vital component in all of this, right? And that has been reinforced to me so much, so many times. And actually, it's been really good in some ways because you realize, you know, how in so many cases, teachers are actually great people. They're in it for the right reasons. They're willing to go above and beyond. They've developed skills that even if they didn't want to spend the time to develop technology skills and digital skills, they've had to, and they've thrown themselves in it. And, you know, you can see this in Glasgow. You know, we've got a community of about 700 digital leaders that are spread over all 300 schools. And these guys have literally, they've done so much. They've led sessions, they've built programs, they've developed content, they've shared that content online, they've worked collaboratively. They've, you know, I mean, it's just been phenomenal, really, genuinely. And the same's true in the borders. You know, we've got an amazing team of cluster leaders in every school, and we've not been able to see these people face to face. And some of the actual work that they've produced, you know, it just makes you stand back in real admiration for the teaching profession as a whole. And you know, we've seen young people, and the equity thing is a really important thing. You know, we talk about that as one of our kind of key drivers for these projects, both in Glasgow and the borders where I'm most involved. You know, about equity of access, the same access to the same great tools for learning, no matter who you are, where you come from, where you live. And that's before you talk about, that's without the pandemic. That's nothing to do with the pandemic. That's what these kids deserve. And we're trying to build.
And sorry, I was just going to say that. So obviously, you know, you're kind of got some experience now being in a environment where it's one-to-one, where there's deployment that's happened, where, you know, and proudly Showbie's part of the solution in Glasgow, in borders as well, you know. So what is the impact that you can see with respect to like assessment and feedback? You know, the day-to-day DNA of teaching and learning, right? Students come in, they've got the devices, they've got access, and so on. How does that change?
Yeah, I mean, it probably in a couple of ways, I think. So obviously the feedback piece is really important, but I think even before you get to that, one of the kind of absolute key things that we build our projects around is simplicity. Like, it has to be simple. We don't want, you know, we talk about nowadays, you know, most technology is good technology. Like, there's a million different ways to have this interview that we're having right now. We could choose any tool in the world. There's so many of them, and they all work pretty much great. And it's almost as important, the fact that you've actually made a decision is just as important as the decision you've made, right? And one of the reasons we chose Showbie, and we do, is because of that kind of like consistent commitment to simplicity. And teachers appreciate that. Parents appreciate that. It's not like you're throwing features at the product.
Yeah.
And nobody's really using it properly because they're continuously bombarded with new features. We've seen some great new features from Showbie, but actually with that maintaining of that kind of crystal clear focus on simplicity, and it just does what it says. And actually that then means that your feedback, that commitment to feedback is really easy to kind of build because you've got a straight line, if you like, line of sight to great feedback. You're not getting interrupted by, you know, so many flashing lights of new features that's telling you new stuff's happening, but it's actually like a new integrations, but it's actually kind of like there's quality feedback. You can actually think about and talk about what does great feedback look like. So we're having genuine pedagogical discussions about, okay, what is good spoken feedback, right? So we know we can give it because it's super easy, right, in a tool like Showbie.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is good feedback? What do you want to say? How do you phrase that? You know, what's the best way of talking about it? And it's some of these questions that are now really impacting the way that young people are actually receiving feedback from staff, and the timeliness, obviously the relevance of the feedback, how quickly they get it, how quickly they can respond, what type of response are we looking for from them. So it's all these key questions. I know it's some of the stuff you've probably been doing with Castle Milk when you've been in Glasgow.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've certainly seen with schools, especially with like digitized verbal feedback, and during lockdown, is that parental transparency. Like when parents can hear the feedback that teachers are giving, and they can actually hear their voice and see how much the teacher's doing and interacting and how their child interacts and so on.
Yeah,
it's a whole new level of kind of insight into the learning experience for their child.
yeah.
Whereas historically, they probably would have had to have had some form of kind of a conversation with their child about what their learning is. And we all know how that goes, right?
Yeah.
But the only real substance where they get anything from the teacher is at the end of the semester, end of the term, when they get a report or when there's a parents' evening and so on. And I think like one of the things that I've kind of heard parents saying, and these are parents that don't necessarily, I mean, this is in my local community, but parents that necessarily don't know that I'm kind of working for Showbie or anything like that, but they're actually saying, hey, we can actually hear the teachers speaking to our children and what they're saying, and that means that we can kind of follow on with that conversation. And like there was the report from the Education Endowment Foundation that talked about parental impact, and then how that can have impact on outcomes if the parents are involved as part of their learning. And I think that kind of transparency is probably only brought in through technology.
Yeah, and we showcased. I mean, we in the Borders, for example, we did a kind of showcase thing with parents for Showbie, and actually, literally, it was the one thing that from the moment we did it, parents were bombarding us with, when is it happening? When are we getting it? When does it become available? When is it on everybody's iPad? And we were like, well, hold on, we need to work with the teachers for a bit. We've got a bit of work to do with schools to get this up and running, because the minute they saw it, they could see the value of it. And it's exactly what you've said there. And we all know. I mean, I remember, I think probably being with you and part of my presentation was about the fact that I built a digital report card.
Yes.
Back in the day, right, with iPad, and it was like, it was a cool thing. We did it. I think I built it in, I don't know, it was iBooks Author, right, where and we captured videos of the kids speaking about their own learning, and we put it into the report card. And parents were like, this is amazing. This kind of opens the doors of the classroom and lets us in. But now that just feels like, it just feels that the idea of a report card, I mean, it's like, what do you get out of that? It's an ongoing conversation about learning, and the parents are right at the heart of that conversation.
Absolutely. This was a long time ago, but you've just kind of brought this memory back up, right? I went to a school actually in Bolton. So at that time, it was those crazy days of traveling everywhere, right? So I happened to be, the good old days. I happened to be in Bolton for a while, and a school down the road got in touch with me to say, hey, we got some iPads and we hear you're doing stuff with technology and education. Can you come and do a session with our teachers? So I think they set apart like an hour and a half kind of session after school. So I went there. Teachers were kind of getting a bit nervous about, what can be done and all of that kind of stuff. Anyway, that whole simplicity element and just giving teachers the aha moment and getting parents to have that. If you can get a whole school community to have an aha moment, like, wow, this is amazing, you're kind of on a winner, right? So I said, I'm just going to show you something for 10 minutes. And then after that, you guys are just going to change everything. And they were looking at me like, yes, but we don't know how to use technology and so on. So you'll know the app, right? Explain Everything.
Yep.
Right.
That
it was the free version, right? So we downloaded that. All the teachers downloaded it, no problem. Okay, great. Right. Next thing, basically showed them how to tap the record button, and then there wasn't like pencils and styluses at the time. They just used their finger. And I said, what I want you to do is just find a quiet spot somewhere in the school, and with your finger, just do a math problem, right?
Yeah.
32 times 34, and this is how you do it, and so on, and then just stop the record button. Just showed them that a few times, and they all went away and did it. And one of the things you could do then, I'm pretty sure you could still do it now as well, but you could export it straight to YouTube. And whilst they were doing that, I made this like YouTube channel for the school, just kind of a free YouTube account, Gmail, blah, blah, blah. When they all came back, I gave them the credentials. And before you knew it, you had like 40 videos, tutorials of that. And I said, look, your parents can see this now.
Do I need to say any more? Yeah.
And that was it, the whole kind of concept. They understood actually what we could do. Like we could change this and we could change that, and we could, and I gave them time just to sit and just think about the possibilities with that, and then, they moved into the Showbie environment. They started sharing videos, parents, all of that. And now it's a one-to-one school because they actually saw the value and saw the possibilities with this, And I think that's kind of quite key.
Totally, and we've had very, very similar experiences to that about, in terms of changing the conversations with parents around, around understanding the why behind it. And actually talking about voice is a really interesting one, because we did a survey with pupils in the borders, about how do you like to learn and what do you appreciate, and it wasn't just video, because video was really key, but it wasn't, and this was really interesting. But what they said was, I appreciate my teacher's voice. So not just a YouTube link with, this is some guy in America talking about how you do quadratic equations. I actually appreciate my teacher, and I learn better when I hear that's my teacher. And that's a really interesting thing for us, because I think we're used to kind of, if you need to know how to plumb a washing machine in, we go to YouTube and we see the guy on the YouTube channel, right? How do you plumb in your washing machine? But actually, and they get that, but I think it makes it even more powerful when it's like, that's my teacher. Yeah. So showcasing how to teachers, how do you do that is amazing.
Absolutely. And you know what? The fact that parents can listen to that or watch that tutorial that the teacher's done, and it's the teacher's voice, means that they're actually empowered to kind of work with their children. And it's not about knowing maths or not knowing maths, or deprived communities or not deprived communities. Because actually, there's a lot of methodology and curriculum stuff that's changed anyway. And quite often, parents just don't know what is being taught and how it's being taught. And if they're in a position to have that kind of transparency, it means that you can actually kind of have do things and have that kind of communication and support with your child in a way that just wasn't possible in the past. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure that during COVID, like that would have been a really useful, powerful tool for parents to be able to have that.
Totally. And I actually think that one of the things I'm glad about in Scotland is that, what we found, say in Glasgow and in the borders, is you've provided equity, but you've almost just kind of shifted the conversation. So there is an equity now. If you live in the borders, or if you live in Glasgow, if you live in one of these other one-to-one local authorities, there's equity within that local authority, but actually it pushes the conversation more widely, and you can see it now happening even at the UK level and wider than that even. It's like that equity question has to be answered, like the digital divide question has to be answered. And it happens at scale. And I think the value for us now is that we kind of know what the answers are. Like you'll be the same, but I feel like I've made so many mistakes all along the journey, and with every mistake, I'm like, well, I would not do that again. I wouldn't choose that again. I would avoid that. I would make sure that I communicated that bit better. So almost like we're starting to get to the point where you're like, if you are a local authority, a municipality, a large multi-academy trust or whatever, and you want to know what does good look like, now we can say, well, here's almost like the steps you need to take. Here's the questions you need to answer. Do these things. And actually, it's not kind of like, well, maybe that'll work, but it's actually kind of like, that will definitely work. And I think that's a big shift.
I think I remember in the early days trying to figure things out by having a go, and then it goes wrong, and then you try to figure it out. But in fact, some of the technologies that just didn't exist, so like Jamf, for example, how you control devices, like that stuff just didn't exist. I remember When we first did a one-to-one project, it was with iPod touches, right? So we had 1,000 of these things, and we were plugging them in one by one, right? Configuring them, setting up emails and all that kind of stuff, and still trying to make them look nice and new when they go back in the box. The kids can kind of open it and have that unboxing experience kind of thing. So, but we kind of live in a world where actually mobile is something that's an absolute reality. Mobile devices and the way and the speed at which they develop and the technology that develops around that is just far faster than what we're seeing with tablet type devices and so on. And that for me kind of is an important consideration. And actually speaking to, and I think one other point is that also now you can actually go to a place, go to a go and see an example of a multi-academic trust, go and see an example of a local authority,
Absolutely.
Go and see an individual secondary school, primary school, further education colleges, and you could see the devices in action, you can see Showbie in action, you can see verbal feedback in action, you can see it by speaking to the students and feeling that environment. And I think we're kind of there, and you're right, the answers are there.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm probably more, there's certain things that I'm more like willing to sort of like go, this, like you mentioned mobility there, right? And truly mobile is one of those things that in the borders, we have four pillars of what we've used to kind of like guide the project from the beginning, right? And mobility is one. So mobile, personal, collaborative, and excellent are our kind of, in the borders, they're four. And they're like guiding principles. And actually, you remember that we used to have this discussion back in the day with everybody. What about what device? What? And actually, we started out by saying, well, what do we want learning to look like? And the answer is we want it to be fully mobile. So the classroom, and this is where we're at right now. Is like it's almost the so what questions. Okay, you're a one-to-one authority. So what? What can you do that you couldn't do before? And actually, the classroom can be the sports field, the art gallery, the kids' home, the coffee shop. These places become learning environments because you're truly mobile, and that doesn't require a laptop. It requires more than that, right? And so personalization and that idea of learning happening. And I was talking to, this was a great story actually. Last week I was talking to a bunch of kids in our primary 7, right? So their last year of primary school, and we were just sitting. I was talking to them. We were doing a kind of technical setup thing on some of their iPads, and some of the kids were obviously struggling with it. This little guy sat down with me and he was just like, he flew through the whole thing, just didn't even need me at all. And then he just said, can I just chat to you for a couple of minutes? And I'm like, yeah, sure, we've got time, right? You've just nailed what we were going to do in 20 minutes. You've done it in 30 seconds. So what do you want to say? He was like, I just want to show you what I've been doing in the holidays. I was like, go for it. And he said, I built a wind farm in my back garden. And I was like, what are you talking about? And literally got his iPad and he showed me photographs. He had an old climbing frame. His dad had given him a drill. And this little guy had gone and he built like the windmill out of old bits and pieces that he had about, drilled it and attached it to the top of his old climbing frame. He wired it up to a set of battery cells. He was like, I've got, I had to create an inverter to get the electricity to store it. And then I've got a converter to turn it into 240 volt that I can then use. And literally I stopped this little guy. He's 12, right? And I was like, Sam, I said, you need to take your iPad, go home. I want you to make me a video, take me down to the bottom of your garden, and I want you to walk me through everything you've done there, right? Because that's amazing. And actually, that element of personalization where you can go, I can learn where I want to learn. And I keep saying this to kids, like in learning, like find the hard stuff, the stuff you don't understand, the stuff where you're stuck and you don't know what to do. That's where learning happens, right? Who cares about doing pages and pages of stuff that you can already do so you can get 10 out of 10? That's no use to anybody, right? You want to find the hard stuff and where the technology can help you. And that's a great example. At the bottom of his garden, that's his classroom. And I'm like, amazing, right? So truly mobile. And some of these things, I think I'm a little bit more, I wouldn't say belligerent, but I'm a little bit more kind of definite about. I used to be a lot more about, anything, whatever technology or whatever, Whereas now I'm like, if we want to do it, let's just do it properly and just go with the best, give these kids access to the best, and respect them.
Absolutely. Andy, this has been fascinating, and as with all things, time goes really quickly when you're having fun, and that's kind of like 30 minutes, man, just gone like that. It's been fantastic having you on the podcast. I'm hoping sometime down the line, when Scotland's 1-to-1 and there's more stories and stuff that you can share, we'll have you back on telling us some more. Meanwhile, hopefully I look forward to kind of meeting you in person, sitting down, having a coffee, and continuing with our conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sparing your time and sharing your thoughts and ideas with us. Thank you.
Cheers, Abdul. Thanks. Stay safe. See you soon.